One man tried to protect his town, but the only road to the emergency water supply was suddenly padlocked shut. Karen, the new HOA chairwoman, claimed it was about rules, even as wildfire smoke filled the sky. But James refused to back down, and what happened next turned a quiet neighborhood into the center of a full-blown reckoning. Just wait until you hear how this shocking power move unraveled, and why justice finally took the lead. The sun was just starting to dip behind the hills when James Taylor turned off the main road and onto the dusty stretch that led home. The tires of his old Chevy creaked over gravel as the trees closed in, casting long shadows across the fence line. It was the kind of quiet that only existed outside of cities. Steady, grounding, undisturbed. But something was off. As he approached the gate, a simple metal crossbar he'd opened and closed 1,000 times without thought, he spotted it. Hanging off the latch was a thick, industrial-grade padlock, gleaming like it had just come out of the package. His truck rolled to a stop, engine idling. A pit opened in his stomach. This wasn't his lock. James stepped out, boots crunching into the gravel, eyes fixed on the chain. It was looped twice through the posts. Secure, tight, intentional. Whoever had done this hadn't meant for it to be temporary. He tried the latch anyway. Pulled, jiggled, nothing. Confused, he looked up and down the road. No cars, no workers, no note. Just the wind pressing against the trees. It didn't make sense. That gate wasn't just the entrance to his property. It was also the only direct access to the town's emergency water reservoir. A large concrete tank tucked beyond his backyard, surrounded by brush, and used only when the main supply line failed, or during fire season. Built in the 1970s, it was part of a state-mandated emergency protocol. Access had to remain open, always. He knew the law, and more than that, he knew what that water had meant in the past. In 2018, when the fires came within 2 miles, the fire department had parked their engines on this very road, running hoses over his fence. No one asked. No one needed to. His jaw clenched as he pulled out his phone and called the HOA office. 1 ring, 2, then a click. HOA management, this is Karen, came a voice, tight, emotionless, efficient. He'd never spoken to her before, but he knew who she was. Everyone did. Hi, this is James Taylor. I live on the south boundary, the property with the gate that leads to the reservoir. Someone put a lock on it. A pause. That gate needed to be secured, she said. We've had complaints about non-residents using the road. It's HOA property. James blinked, stunned. It's also the only access to the emergency water reserve. That road isn't just mine. It's designated for fire crews, city trucks. If the city has an issue, she interrupted, they can contact the HOA formally. Her voice sharpened, clipped like an automated message. Until then, the gate stays locked. And just like that, she hung up. James lowered his phone slowly. The silence around him now felt different. Heavier, like something had shifted and couldn't be undone. He turned back toward the lock. The last of the daylight caught the metal, throwing a cold reflection onto his hand. She didn't understand what she'd done, or maybe, and this thought came slower, darker. Maybe she did, and she just didn't care. Karen Phillips had been HOA chairwoman for exactly 67 days when the lock appeared on James's gate. But in that short time, she'd transformed the community from a sleepy cul-de-sac into her own miniature dictatorship. She'd started with the easy targets, pastel curtains that didn't match the neighborhood palette, bird feeders that encouraged pests, a boys' basketball hoop that wasn't architecturally appropriate. She cited page numbers from the HOA handbook like scripture. Residents joked, quietly and only behind closed doors, that she had the rule book memorized. Then came the real changes: solar panels, banned, garden gnomes, offensive to visual harmony, aesthetic inspections, now monthly, unannounced, and documented with photographs. Neighbors rolled their eyes. Some grumbled, but no one really fought back. No one wanted to end up on Karen's list. Everyone knew she had one. James had stayed out of it. His house sat at the very edge of the HOA zone. Practically forgotten, except for the fact that it bordered the old emergency access road. He didn't care about paint codes or mailbox uniformity. He rarely showed up at meetings. The only reason he even interacted with the HOA was to keep that gravel road untouched, the road that led to the town's backup water supply. But Karen had noticed that road. Oh, she noticed it right away. To her, it was an eyesore, an unregulated path, cutting across otherwise tidy properties. Worse, it invited unauthorized foot traffic. In Karen's mind, the fire trucks and maintenance vehicles that occasionally used the path were little more than trespassers, outsiders. She brought it up in her first meeting as chair. We have a security concern on the southern boundary. There's a completely unmonitored gate, no record of usage, no oversight. It's a liability. Someone mentioned it led to the municipal reservoir. She waved it off. If the city wants access, they can ask nicely. Until then, it's our fence, our rules. She didn't mention the legal easement that guaranteed open access. She didn't ask for clarification, and no one challenged her, at least not publicly. Because that was Karen's style. Speak with certainty, never admit doubt, and act before anyone could tell you not to. So when she ordered the padlock installed, it wasn't some small administrative decision. It was a message to James. He was too quiet, too independent. He didn't play the HOA game. He didn't blend in. He was the outlier, and Karen didn't like outliers. She especially didn't like being questioned. To her, the gate was never about water access, or fire risk, or public good. It was about territory. Her territory. And now, James Taylor, the man with the road, the history, the logic, had become a threat, her newest problem, and she was ready to play dirty. By the time James poured his second cup of coffee Saturday morning, his phone was already buzzing. At first, it was just the usual ping of notifications, but they kept coming, faster, louder, until his screen lit up like a slot machine. He opened Facebook, the neighborhood group, usually reserved for lost cats, suspicious teenagers, and arguments about garbage bins, had exploded overnight. Emily R. Does anyone know why the south gate is locked? That road leads to the reservoir, right? Luis M. I saw firefighters use it a couple years back during that dry season. Can the HOA even legally restrict access like that? Maggie T. Wait, that's not just James's land, that's town property too? The questions came like a slow wave, each one pulling more neighbors into the tide, and with them, the panic. James stared at the thread for a long moment. He didn't want drama. He wasn't the type to stir things up online, but this was too important to stay silent, so he typed carefully, precisely. Hi all, just to clarify, the gate in question provides critical access to the town's emergency water reserve. In case of fire or infrastructure failure, that's where crews draw water from. The access is legally protected under a public easement. I'm trying to work this out through the proper channels with the HOA. I appreciate everyone's patience. Polite, informative, non-confrontational. He hit post. 10 minutes later, Karen responded. Her comment was long, formal, but cold enough to chill the screen. The HOA board takes community safety and regulation very seriously. This action was necessary due to increased unauthorized activity in the area. Residents should be grateful we're finally enforcing order. This is our community. She used bold font on our. The tone said it all. It wasn't an explanation, it wasn't a discussion, it was a warning. James read the comment twice, then a third time. Not a single mention of the water reserve, not even an attempt to acknowledge its importance, just order, authority, control. That's when it clicked. This wasn't some administrative oversight. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding or bureaucratic tangle. This was deliberate. Karen didn't lock the gate to protect the neighborhood. She locked it to make a point, one that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with power. She wanted people to know who was in charge, and if that meant cutting off access to life-saving infrastructure, well, that was a risk she was willing to take. By Sunday afternoon, the tension had curdled into something darker. When James stepped outside just before lunch, he saw a new sign, bolted directly onto the metal gate. Black block letters on a white background, screaming with bureaucratic finality. No trespassing, violators will be fined, authorized HOA, access only. His stomach dropped. There was no mistaking it anymore. Karen wasn't backing down, she was digging in. Within the hour, the email blast hit every inbox in the neighborhood. Effective immediately, Unauthorized entry via the southern gate constitutes a violation of HOA Code 3, 2.4. Any access without explicit written approval from the HOA board will result in a $250 fine per instance. No exceptions, no mention of the reservoir, not even a footnote. It wasn't just a sign, it was a declaration. James stared at the email in disbelief. He refreshed the thread. Dozens of comments were already pouring in, half outraged, half confused, some simply scared. And still, Karen said nothing more. He didn't waste time. He called the town's water services department directly. A man named Elliot picked up. James knew him vaguely from a fire response drill years back. "Wait, what?" Elliot said when James explained. "Who locked it? That gate has to stay open. We've got written agreements, interagency compliance. This isn't optional." James could hear him typing furiously. Paper rustling, a chair sliding back. "Let me call over to the HOA. I'll get it cleared up. Should be a quick fix." But it wasn't. An hour passed. Then 2. James called back. "No response yet," Elliot said, more carefully this time. "I sent the documents. I escalated it. I even flagged it to the city's legal team. Still nothing." Later that day, the fire department got involved. The assistant fire chief himself, Lieutenant Marshall, called Karen's office line, then her cell, then the emergency HOA contact. No one picked up. He left messages, emailed, followed protocol, still silence. James knew that silence well. It wasn't the silence of someone overwhelmed. It was the silence of someone ignoring you on purpose. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't confusion. It was a power move. Karen had heard the warnings. She'd seen the posts. She'd received the documents. And she chose not to act. Because for her, this was never about rules. Not really. This was about ownership, territory, obedience. She didn't care if James was right. She didn't care if the city was involved. She didn't care if lives were potentially at risk. What mattered, all that mattered, was that no one would tell her what to do. And standing at the center of it all was a metal gate, locked tight and now backed by threats. James felt it like pressure behind his ribs. A quiet certainty, growing heavier with each hour. Something was coming, something bad, and no one would be able to say they didn't see it coming. At 11:42 p.m., a call came into dispatch. A glow on the ridge. Flames 5 miles out, moving fast. The hills were dry, the wind hot and erratic. A spark, no one knew from what, had caught a patch of grass just off Route 12. Within 15 minutes, the fire tripled in size. Trees lit like matchsticks. The smoke rose black against the stars. By 12:06 a.m., the emergency response plan was activated, and that's when the first problem surfaced. The town's primary water system, already weakened from the last storm, had gone offline, pumps knocked out. It was a known vulnerability, one the city had planned around for years. That's what the emergency reservoir was for. Protocol was simple. Enter through the south access road, unlock the gate, hook into the hydrant system, and deploy water uphill. It had worked before. It should have worked now. But when Engine 7 pulled up to the gate, headlights slicing through smoke, they didn't find an open path. They found a wall, a 12-foot chain-link fence, reinforced posts, and at the gate, a triple-sealed padlock, cold and unyielding, under the beams of their flashlights. No code, no key, no access. The firefighters radioed command, asked for bolt cutters. The closest set, 20 minutes out, and the fire, 15 minutes from the tree line. James Taylor was dead asleep when the pounding started, a fist against wood, then another, urgent, desperate. He stumbled from bed, heart racing. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He opened the door to find a firefighter, face slick with sweat and soot already forming on his helmet. "We need that gate open, now!" James froze for half a second, then nodded. Boots, keys, flashlight. They ran together toward the back of his property. The air was thick, already tinged with smoke. Somewhere in the distance, sirens screamed. And then, the lights, red and white, blinking through trees, fire crews, hoses laid out, men shouting. But they were all standing still, waiting, at the gate. James stopped short when he saw it, the padlock glinting like a warning shot. "I don't have a key," he said, breath catching in his throat. "The HOA, Karen has it." "We tried calling," one of the firefighters said. "No answer." Another was already on the radio. "We need access through the fence. Repeat. Obstruction at reservoir gate. No tools. No ingress." They didn't wait. Two of them ran to the fire engine, pulled out a rotary saw. Sparks flew as they tried to cut the bolt. The metal held. It wasn't just a lock, it was a statement. Behind them, over the trees, the sky turned orange. The fire had crested the ridge. James stepped back as the saw finally shrieked through the lock's core. It dropped to the ground like a fallen gauntlet. They threw the gate open. The hoses snaked through. Water began to pump, but it was too late to save everything. Up on the hill, one of the outer cabins caught first. It lit in seconds. Dry timber, old wiring. The residents were elderly, barely made it out. Another crew pulled up, flashing lights cutting through smoke like strobes. The flames weren't waiting, and all James could do was stand in the middle of his own yard, smoke curling into his lungs, and watch the fire and consequences finally arrive. The rotary saw screamed against the fence. Sparks flew in every direction, lighting the smoke-choked night with bursts of white and orange. But it wasn't working. The fire crew had hit reinforced steel, a recent addition no one had been told about. They radioed command. "We need cutting torches now." Silence. Static. Then, ETA, 12 minutes. 12 minutes. James looked up. The sky was on fire, not figuratively, literally. The orange line on the ridge was no longer a line. It was moving, swelling, alive. They didn't have 12 minutes. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and scrolled to Karen's number. She picked up on the third ring. "Karen, it's James. We've got a fire. It's spreading fast. The crews can't get in. We need that gate open." A pause. Too long. Then her voice came, flat and clipped, like she was reading from a manual. "I don't have the key. Bill does." James closed his eyes, the heat from the fire already prickling his skin. "Where is he?" "He's in Florida with his family." "Until Thursday." "Karen, people's homes are in danger. We need access to the reservoir, now." Another pause, a sigh, almost theatrical. Then maybe they should have followed HOA protocols instead of treating this community like it's the Wild West. And she hung up. Just like that. No emotion, no hesitation, no shame. James lowered the phone slowly. For a second, he couldn't feel his fingers. Then the heat came roaring back into his blood. It wasn't helplessness. Not exactly. It was fury. A clean, burning rage that pulsed behind his eyes and hollowed out his chest. Because this wasn't about negligence anymore. It wasn't about bureaucracy or bad communication. This was willful obstruction. This was deliberate arrogance. This was someone putting her own fragile authority above human life. The firefighters were screaming behind him. Engines roared. The night burned. But all James could hear was her voice in his head. Then maybe they should have thought about that. He clenched the phone so tightly it cracked. It was nearly 1:30 a.m. when the second fire engine arrived, this time with industrial cutting tools and a team that wasn't here to ask permission. They didn't bother with the gate. Instead, they moved to the far side of the fence, near the slope where the metal had started to rust from decades of wind and rain. It wasn't HOA sanctioned, and no one had a permit. No one cared. The saw roared to life, spitting sparks into the smoke-choked air. James watched from the side, hands clenched at his sides, every muscle tensed. The cut was loud, ugly, violent, and necessary. Metal screamed, steel peeled, and just like that, the boundary broke. They fed hoses through the gap. Thick, black lines that stretched across James's lawn, coiled around his porch, cut through his rose bushes like they weren't even there. His property, his sanctuary, had become a fire corridor. Within minutes, the pumps engaged. A deep mechanical hum filled the night as water surged from the reservoir, gushing down the lines and up into the hands of men already soaked in sweat and ash. 3 homes stood directly in the path of the flames. The crews reached them just in time. They doused roofs, soaked wooden siding, filled gutters, flooded lawns. The fire hit the perimeter and stalled. It roared and hissed, clawed at the wet walls but couldn't take hold. Those homes were saved, but not all of them. Just up the incline above the tree line sat a modest cabin, isolated, quiet, and older than anything else in the neighborhood. The Grants lived there, Harold and Lucille, married 48 years. They were the kind of neighbors everyone knew but rarely saw, always polite, always private. The kind of couple who waved from their porch swing and brought out a thermos of hot cider on Halloween. They never stood a chance. By the time crews reached the top of the ridge, the flames had swallowed the back wall. Smoke poured through shattered windows. The roof cracked inward, and the cabin collapsed like an exhale, all at once. The Grants had escaped minutes earlier, barefoot, clutching each other as they stumbled down the path toward a patrol unit. They made it out. Their dogs didn't. James saw them later, sitting on the back of an ambulance, wrapped in foil blankets, their eyes hollow. Lucille held one of the dog's collars in her lap like it was a prayer. She didn't speak. Harold just kept nodding to no one, lips moving without sound. By 4:37 a.m., the flames were finally declared contained. The fire had scorched 11 acres, destroyed one home, melted fences, turned lawns to ash. But thanks to the reservoir, thanks to those final minutes of access, it hadn't taken more. The emergency crews didn't cheer. There were no high fives, just silence and soot, the kind that clings to your skin long after the flames are out. James stood in the middle of his yard, the grass soaked and muddy under his boots. He watched as the hoses were reeled back, as firefighters packed up in silence. He watched the sun start to rise behind a layer of smoke that turned everything blood orange. It was over. But it wasn't. By mid-morning, the fire chief's office filed a formal complaint with the town. The language was sterile, bureaucratic, but James read between the lines: delayed emergency access, unauthorized obstruction of municipal easement, potential endangerment of life and property. One confirmed structure lost, 2 domestic animals deceased. By lunchtime, city officials were calling the HOA. Still, no response. But the world was watching now. On Monday morning, James's phone rang 6 times before breakfast. First, it was the Tannersville Gazette, then a reporter from Channel 3. By 9 a.m., someone from the state fire marshal's office had called, then CNN Local. They all wanted the same thing. Can you confirm the HOA blocked the fire crews? Were you the property owner with the reservoir access? Do you believe this loss was preventable? James didn't know what to say. Because yes, it was preventable. And yes, he had tried. And yes, they had warned her. But none of that would bring the Grants home back. None of that would stop the smoke still curling from the trees. And none of that, none, would undo the decision that one woman made to prove she was in charge. The photo spread fast. Karen Phillips, arms crossed, HOA seal behind her, expression half smile, half smirk, now sat beneath the headline, HOA chairwoman blocks emergency response, home destroyed in overnight fire. The article was brief, but the facts were brutal. By Monday evening, 3 news outlets had picked it up. By Tuesday, her name was circulating in legal memos. The HOA scrambled. A special emergency meeting was called. Packed room, quiet rage. The fire chief testified first. Intro, clear, calm, irrefutable. The gate delay cost us 35 minutes. That can mean lives. Then James spoke. Then the Grants. Shaken, silent, but present. Lucille held a collar in her lap. She didn't need to speak. Her presence said everything. Karen tried. I was following procedure. There were safety concerns. But the room had already turned. No one interrupted her. No one defended her. They just stared, tight-lipped, until the vote was called. Unanimous, removed. The fallout was swift. The town filed a civil suit against the HOA for obstruction of emergency services. Karen's personal liability came under review. Her name appeared in official reports and online threads. By Friday, her Facebook was gone. The HOA email, deactivated. The community newsletter arrived without a message from the chair for the first time in years. Her photo, taken down. In its place, someone pinned a sheet of white paper to the bulletin board by the front gate. 1 sentence, 12 words. Power doesn't protect you when the fire comes through the gate. No signature, none needed. It took weeks, but the dust finally settled, both literally and figuratively. The fire was out, the damage assessed, insurance claims filed. The Grants were temporarily relocated to a small rental at the base of the hill, and the town, still stunned, had started the slow process of healing. At the edge of it all, the gate stood. Quiet, still locked. A charred patch of ground beneath it told its own story, not one of flame, but of arrogance. Of something that was never supposed to be there in the first place. And then, one day, it was gone. No press conference, no ribbon cutting, no dramatic announcement. Just a new post installed in its place, brushed steel with a digital keypad and an ID reader for authorized municipal personnel. The town had signed off on a permanent 24/7 access protocol for all emergency services. Backup keys were stored at the fire station. The system was weatherproof, tamper-proof, and most importantly, politics-proof. This time, it wouldn't depend on anyone's approval. The HOA didn't argue. They couldn't. The civil case was ongoing, legal fees mounting, and Karen's name had become a cautionary tale, even beyond their neighborhood. James had been invited, more than once, to join the newly formed Community Safety Advisory Board. They offered him a seat, a title, even a modest stipend. He declined, not out of spite, not out of pride. He just didn't want power. He wanted peace. Still, he helped, quietly. He worked with the city to revise the reservoir bylaws, drafted the new access guidelines, reviewed the infrastructure specs. He made sure the language was clear, airtight, and unmistakable. This entry point shall remain unimpeded at all times. In cases of emergency, access is to be immediate, automatic, and absolute. No more phone calls. No more asking permission. No more locks. A few weeks later, near sunset, James walked the path behind his house. The same path fire crews had once sprinted down in the dark, hauling hoses and shouting commands. The grass was growing again. Patches of green pushed through the blackened soil. Nature, slow but stubborn, was taking the land back inch by inch. There were still scars, of course. Some trees had burned down to their cores. Some things wouldn't come back, but most would. He stopped near the gate, now just a sleek post and a stretch of open road beyond. The reservoir glinted in the distance, calm and untouched, cradled between the hills like a sleeping giant. There was no one else around, no reporters, no angry voices, no applause, just the breeze moving through the trees and the low hum of cicadas waking for the night. James rested a hand on the metal post, cold, solid. He didn't think about the hearings or the signatures, or even the grants, not right now. What filled him wasn't sorrow or rage or pride. It was something simpler, relief. Because when it had mattered, when it really mattered, the community stood up. They didn't riot. They didn't scream. They just said no. No to ego over safety. No to silence over responsibility. No to the idea that power is ever more important than people. And now the gate stood open, as it should have always been. Someone tried to lock away safety, and the community said no, quietly, clearly, permanently.